The Haunting of the 68 Firebird.
I want you to close your eyes for a second. Really picture this. It's late autumn. The air has that crisp bite that makes your breath fog up in front of you. The leaves are a burnt orange and crimson, scattered on the asphalt like a broken mosaic. Now imagine a long, winding back road in rural Vermont. The kind of road that disappears into a tunnel of trees, where streetlights are forgotten luxury, and the only illumination comes from the moon, if you're lucky. This is where our story begins, with a guy named Leo. Leo wasn't a trucker, or a cop, or any of the usual road warriors we talk about. He was a mechanic, a man who lived and breathed classic American muscle. For Leo, a car wasn't just metal and wires. It was a character with its own history, its own secrets. He found it in a barn, buried under a tarp so old it was practically part of the dirt floor. A 1968 Pontiac Firebird, cherry red, with a faded white racing stripe running down the hood. The body was a wreck, rust eating away at the fenders like a disease. But to Leo, it was a blank canvas. He saw the potential, the roar of that engine just waiting to be unleashed. He bought it for a song from an old farmer who just wanted it gone, who didn't seem to want to talk about the car at all. Leo spent months on that Firebird. He lived in his garage, greasy and happy. He replaced the engine, stripped the rust, and gave it a new coat of paint that shimmered in the fluorescent light. It was his masterpiece. But as he worked, he started to notice things. Little things at first. The radio would turn on by itself, a low static hiss filling the silence of the shop. He'd find the driver's side window rolled down in the morning, even though he was certain he'd put it up the night before. He'd just shake his head, blaming it on faulty wiring, old ghosts in the machine. But the oddities escalated. One night, he was working on the interior, the car doors propped open, a floodlight shining in. He bent over to work on the wiring under the dash, and from the corner of his eye, he saw it, a reflection in the windshield, a fleeting shape, like a ripple in a puddle, but with a form. It was a person, sitting in the passenger seat. Just for a second, he shot upright, hard hammering against his ribs, and the car was empty. The reflection was gone, and there was nothing but the dusty interior and the tools he'd left scattered on the floor. Leo tried to laugh it off. Too many late nights, too much coffee. But the feeling of being watched, the chill that had nothing to do with the night air, stayed with him. He started talking to the car. "All right, old girl," he'd say. "What's your story?" He was half joking, but he was also half praying for an answer. The answer came on the first drive. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, the car purring like a lion. The engine sang, the road was wide open, and for a moment, Leo felt a pure, unadulterated joy. He was heading for a car show, a few hours away. Everything was perfect until he was on that winding back road. The same kind of road where he'd bought the car. He was doing about 60, the sun glinting off the hood, when the radio flickered to life. Not a hiss this time, but a faint old song. Something from the 60s, a sad, slow ballad he didn't recognize. Then he felt it, a weight, as if someone had just sat down in the passenger seat beside him. The seatbelt light, which he knew was broken, flickered on. The car's temperature dropped by what felt like 20 degrees. He glanced over, and there it was. Not a reflection this time, but a full, clear figure. A woman. Her hair was a light brown, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked etched into her face. She was wearing a simple white dress, and a long, thin scar ran from her hairline down her cheek. She didn't look at him. She just stared straight ahead, as if seeing something he couldn't. Leo slammed on the brakes. The Firebird screeched to a halt, the tires biting into the asphalt. He turned to the passenger seat, and it was empty. The song on the radio stopped. The seatbelt light went out. The warmth returned. He sat there, trembling, his hands shaking so much he could barely grip the steering wheel. He wanted to get out, to run, but he couldn't. He was paralyzed. He limped the car home, the joy of the drive replaced by a bone-deep dread. He couldn't sell it. He felt like he had a responsibility to this ghost, to this unknown woman. He felt her grief every time he got in the car. It was a palpable thing, a heavy cloud that settled over the Firebird. The next few weeks, he became obsessed. He drove that car every day, sometimes for hours, hoping to see her again, to understand. He started researching the previous owner. The old farmer was gone, had moved to a nursing home, but his neighbors remembered him. They remembered the Firebird, and they remembered the tragic story. Turns out, the farmer's daughter had owned the car. Her name was Mary Lou, and in the late summer of '68, she and her boyfriend, Billy, were out for a drive. They'd just bought the Firebird. They were teenagers in love, with the whole world ahead of them. They were driving on that very same winding back road when a drunk driver swerved into their lane. The crash was horrific. Billy died instantly. Mary Lou survived for a few hours, pinned in the wreckage of the car, bleeding out. Her father found her there, still conscious, but slipping away. She died in his arms, right there, in the driver's seat of her brand new Firebird. The farmer couldn't bear to look at the car. He dragged it back to his barn and covered it up, a tomb of shattered metal and broken dreams. When Leo learned the truth, it all clicked. The woman wasn't in the passenger seat. She was in the driver's seat. He'd been seeing her reflection, a glimpse of her spirit still in the place where she died. The scar on her face, he learned, was from the shattered windshield glass. She was still trapped in that moment, in the wreckage, in her final moments. Leo went to the car. He sat in the driver's seat, where she had been. He put his hand on the steering wheel and closed his eyes. The feeling of dread was still there, but now it was mixed with a profound sadness. He spoke to her, not like a mechanic to a machine, but like one soul to another. "Mary Lou," he whispered, "I know what happened. I'm so sorry." He told her the car was fixed, that it was beautiful again, that it was safe. He told her she didn't have to stay here, that she was free. For a long moment, there was nothing, just silence. Then, from the dashboard, a single, tiny light flickered, a soft, gentle green. The seatbelt light. It turned on, stayed on for a few seconds, and then went out for good. And with it, the chill in the car lifted. The heavy feeling was gone. Leo never saw her again. He still has the Firebird. He drives it every Sunday, and sometimes, late at night, when he's on a quiet stretch of road, he'll feel a familiar warmth in the driver's seat beside him, like a hand on his shoulder. Not a ghost, not a haunting, just a memory. A reminder of a girl who found her peace, thanks to a mechanic who was willing to listen to the whispers in the windshield.
The Man in the Mirror.
Have you ever driven so long that the world outside the windshield starts to lose its meaning? The lines on the road become a blurry, endless ribbon. The trees on the side of the highway morph into a dark, pulsing wall. You've been awake for so many hours. The coffee's just a vague memory, and the only thing keeping you going is the rumble of the engine and the promise of a distant truck stop. That's the world our character, a long-haul trucker named Vince, lived in. Vince wasn't a newbie. He'd been on the road for 20 years. His rig, a beat-up Freightliner, was more of a home to him than his apartment back in Toledo. He knew the highways like the back of his calloused hand, from the sun-scorched stretches of Arizona to the icy mountain passes of Colorado. He'd seen everything, flipped over semis, blinding blizzards, and enough wild animals to fill a zoo. But nothing had ever prepared him for what he was about to see. It was a night like any other, the kind of clear, star-speckled night that looks beautiful in a movie but feels isolating when you're out there on your own. He was on I-80, somewhere in the middle of Nebraska, a state that seems to stretch on forever. He had a tight schedule and he was pushing it, trying to get to a delivery in Cheyenne by morning. The cab was warm and quiet, save for the low hum of the CB radio and the drone of the engine. He was sipping a lukewarm can of soda, his mind drifting, when he caught a movement in his side mirror. It was a small, almost insignificant thing, a flash of light that seemed out of place. He glanced over, adjusted the mirror, and saw nothing, just the empty, two-lane highway behind him, stretching back into the darkness. He shrugged it off. Probably just a trick of the light, a piece of old reflective tape on a signpost. He'd been seeing things on the road for years. Fatigue does that to you. But a few minutes later, it happened again. This time, it was a subtle shift in the darkness. A shape. He looked in the mirror again, and for a split second, he saw something else. It was a man, standing on the side of the road, facing his truck. He was wearing a dark, torn jacket, and his face was obscured in shadow. Vince's heart gave a little jolt. He'd passed no one for miles. There was nothing out here but open fields and the occasional distant farmhouse. A hitchhiker? At this hour, in this weather, in the middle of nowhere? He didn't see a car, a truck, or anything. The whole thing felt wrong. He drove on, the image of the man in his mind. He told himself it was just a hitchhiker, a desperate soul, but something didn't fit. The man wasn't holding his thumb out. He wasn't waving. He was just standing there, watching. The tension started to build. Vince tried to shake it off, turning up the music, but he couldn't stop glancing at his side mirror. He saw it again. The man was still there, and this time he was closer. So much closer. It was impossible. Vince had been doing a steady 65 miles an hour. He must be seeing things. He rubbed his eyes, shook his head, and looked again. Empty highway. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. He slowed down, his foot easing off the accelerator. He was rationalizing it, telling himself it was a hallucination, a side effect of the coffee and the long hours. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was so overwhelming it felt physical. He was a seasoned driver, but every nerve in his body was screaming at him to stop. He pulled his rig onto the shoulder, the air brakes hissing as the massive truck ground to a halt. He sat there in the silent cab, the engine still rumbling, and stared into his side mirror. The reflection showed nothing but the dark road and the pale, lonely moonlight. The logical part of his brain told him to drive on. The animal part of his brain, the one that deals with primal fear, was telling him to get out of there. Just as he was about to put the truck in gear, he saw it. Not in the mirror, not on the side of the road, but in the passenger side window. It was a reflection of the man, but not standing. He was in the passenger seat, sitting, looking straight at him. His face was a blurry, gray mess of features, but his eyes were clear. They were a dull, dead brown, and they were filled with a profound, terrifying emptiness. The man's lips were moving, but no sound came out. It was a silent plea, a silent scream. Vince screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore from his throat. He threw his arm out, shielding his eyes from the window, and hit the gas. The Freightliner roared back to life, lurching onto the road, tires spitting gravel. He didn't look at the mirror. He didn't look at the window. He drove. He drove faster than he had ever driven in his life. His knuckles white on the steering wheel, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He was flying down the highway, pushing the engine to its limit, the wind howling around the cab like a hungry wolf. He felt a cold presence in the cab. He could feel the temperature drop. He knew he wasn't alone. He knew the man was still there, sitting silently, watching him. He finally risked a glance at his rearview mirror, the one above his head, and saw it. The man was there, in the back of the cab, sitting on his bunk, his eyes still fixed on him. Vince's mind snapped. He was going to die. He was going to crash and burn. He was going to be a statistic, another driver who fell asleep at the wheel. He slammed on the brakes, the air brakes screaming in protest. The truck shuddered to a stop. He threw open the door, grabbed his emergency flashlight, and scrambled out of the cab, his body trembling so violently he could barely stand. He stood on the side of the highway, gasping for air, pointing the beam of the flashlight at his cab. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the empty passenger seat, the empty bunk. Nothing. No one. The silent dread, however, was still there, a thick, suffocating blanket. He stood there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled down, the only sound in the vast, empty night. He was going insane. He had to be. There was no other explanation. He was alone on the road, miles from anywhere, and he was seeing things that weren't there. He climbed back into the cab, his body heavy with exhaustion and fear. He started the engine, put the truck in gear, and slowly, cautiously drove on. He couldn't afford to lose this delivery. He couldn't afford to lose his mind. He promised himself he wouldn't look in the mirrors. He would just focus on the road ahead. He was a few miles down the road when he heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from the back of the cab, like something was dragging itself across the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut. He told himself it was his imagination. He had to keep driving. He had to get to Cheyenne. The scraping sound got louder. It was punctuated by a wet, gurgling sound. like someone was trying to breathe through a clogged throat. The smell of something old and musty, like damp earth and rot, filled the cab. He bit down on his lip, drawing blood, trying to distract himself, trying to ignore it. He was a rational man. He was a trucker. This wasn't real. But then, his rearview mirror, the one above his head, fogged over. He watched, horrified, as a single word was etched into the condensation. It was a single, trembling word, written backward, as if by a hand from the other side. Help! Vince's foot slammed on the brake again, but this time, the truck didn't slow down. The engine roared, the speed climbing, faster than he'd ever driven it. The steering wheel was vibrating in his hands, but he wasn't in control. The brakes weren't responding. He felt the phantom presence in the cab solidify. He felt a cold, clammy hand on his shoulder. He looked in the mirror, and this time, the man wasn't in the back. He was in the driver's seat, behind him, and his face was no longer a blurry mess. It was clear. It was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over the bones, a mess of dried blood and dirt on his brow. The empty, dead eyes were looking at him, but the mouth was no longer silent. It was open in a silent scream, a horrifying, gaping maw of agony. And in the man's eyes, Vince saw his own reflection, his own face, pale with terror. But his reflection wasn't just his face, it was also the man's. It was both of them, superimposed. The man's empty eyes staring out from his own. He wasn't just being haunted, he was becoming the ghost. The truck flew down the highway, an unguided missile, and Vince knew he was going to die. He was going to become the next ghost to ride with the spectral driver, forever trapped in the cab, a silent scream etched on his face, a warning to the next poor soul who saw him in the mirror. The truck veered sharply to the left. The world outside the windshield turned into a spinning kaleidoscope of black and green. The last thing Vince saw was the man in the mirror, his face a perfect, horrifying reflection of his own. The man was smiling, a slow, malevolent smile of pure triumph. The wreckage was found 3 days later, a crushed freightliner, off the road and buried in a field of corn. The authorities assumed the driver had fallen asleep, a common tragedy on these long, lonely roads. They never found the body. They just found the cab, twisted and empty. But the tow truck driver who hauled it away, a man who'd seen it all, swore that as he was securing the cab, he saw a man's face in the rearview mirror. It was a face contorted in a silent scream. And the man, the driver told his friends, was wearing a trucker's hat, and his eyes were completely empty.
The Phantom Fire.
The smell of smoke is something every firefighter knows. It's a mix of burnt wood, melting plastic, and something acrid and metallic that you can almost taste. It's a smell that gets into your clothes, your hair, your skin, and follows you home. But for a volunteer firefighter named Mark, the smell of smoke became something else entirely. It became a warning, a premonition, a nightmare that played out on a lonely stretch of highway in the Australian outback. Mark wasn't a city firefighter. He was part of a small, rural crew. Their world was vast and sparsely populated. Their days a mix of waiting for the call and running drills. Their nights spent staring at an endless sky full of stars. The calls they got were often for bushfires, which were a whole different beast than a house fire. They were fast, unpredictable, and could turn an entire landscape into an inferno in a matter of minutes. It was a hot, dry summer night, the kind of night where the air feels heavy and still, like a held breath. Mark was driving back to the station after a long shift, the siren silent, the truck a heavy, rattling coffin of a vehicle. He was on the air highway, the road that cuts across the Nullarbor Plain, one of the straightest, loneliest stretches of road in the world. There's nothing out there for miles but red dirt, scrub brush, and a silence so profound it can drive you mad. He was about 150 kilometers west of Norseman when he saw it. In the distance, against the black canvas of the night sky, a faint glow. He squinted, his mind instantly on alert. It looked like a fire, a big one. He hit the accelerator, the old truck groaning in protest as he pushed it faster. His radio was crackling with static. No one else was on this stretch of highway. He was alone. As he got closer, the glow became a monstrous, living thing. A wall of fire, easily 30 meters high. was roaring out of the trees, a vortex of orange and red devouring everything in its path. It was a bushfire of a magnitude he had never seen before. He felt a shot of adrenaline. He was just a single truck, a single man, and this was an inferno. He slowed down, radioing in the coordinates, his voice tight with urgency. He was reporting on a scene of utter, horrific devastation. The fire was right on the edge of the highway, a torrent of burning embers shooting across the asphalt like angry wasps. He could feel the heat on his face from inside the cab. It was so hot, so intense, that he had to pull over, unable to go on. He was outgunned, and he knew it. He just sat there, in awe and in terror, watching the inferno rage. But then, he noticed something strange. The fire was roaring, but it wasn't moving. It was a wall of flame, a churning, destructive force, but it was just staying in one place. And the smoke wasn't rising. It was hanging low, a thick, suffocating blanket, but it was perfectly still. It was a contradiction. A fire that big, that hot, should be roaring with wind. Its smoke plume a massive column in the sky. But this was silent and still. It was like a photograph, a still image of destruction that was somehow alive. Then he saw the car, a small, crushed sedan, a silver hatchback, completely engulfed in the flames. He couldn't make out the make or model, just a tortured, twisted wreck of metal. He felt a wave of nausea. Someone was in there. The fire department's rule, the one drilled into you from day one, is to never enter a blaze alone. But this was different. The silence, the stillness of the fire, was a siren call. It was calling out to him, beckoning him forward. He grabbed his gear, pulled on his jacket, and stepped out of the truck. The heat was immense, a physical wall of force. But the air was still silent. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He started walking toward the wall of fire, his axe in one hand, his flashlight in the other. He felt a sense of dread, of foreboding, but he couldn't stop. He had to know. He had to see. As he got closer, the heat intensified, but he didn't feel the usual convection of a massive fire. The flames were a chaotic, twisting dance of destruction, but they weren't radiating heat like they should. He got to within a few meters of the car, the paint melting off the hood in a sickening, bubbly stew. He shone his flashlight into the driver's side window, and that's when he saw them. Two people, a man and a woman. They were in the front seats, slumped over, their bodies charred and blackened, their faces frozen in silent screams. Their mouths were open, their eyes wide and empty. They weren't moving, of course. They were dead. But they weren't just dead bodies. They were part of the fire. The flames were licking at them, consuming them, but their forms were distinct, like they were trapped in the act of burning, a continuous, horrific loop. He felt the fear rise up in his throat, a bitter taste. He backed away, his mind reeling. This wasn't a fire. This was a nightmare made manifest. He turned, stumbled back to his truck, and slammed the door shut. He radioed back in, his voice a frantic stammer. He told them what he saw. The operator on the other end, a seasoned vet, was silent for a long time. Then he told Mark to get out of there. "That's a ghost fire, son. You don't fight those. You just leave." Mark didn't need to be told twice. He put the truck in gear and drove, the terrifying wall of fire shrinking in his rearview mirror. He drove for an hour, maybe more, his hand shaking on the steering wheel, his mind replaying the sight of the two people, trapped forever in a purgatory of flame. He finally pulled into a small, desolate roadhouse, his truck empty and his spirit broken. He ordered a coffee, the kind that can wake the dead, and sat at the counter, his mind a million miles away. The grizzled old owner, a man who had seen everything on the road, saw the look on his face. "Rough night, son?" he asked. Mark just nodded, unable to speak. The owner just looked at him, a knowing look in his eyes. He didn't press. He just turned on the small television behind the bar. The news was on. The local report was talking about a fatal accident that had happened a week ago, on that very stretch of the air highway. A small silver hatchback had collided with a tanker carrying fuel. The crash had caused a massive explosion, a fire that had burned for days. 2 people had been killed instantly. The bodies were never recovered. The authorities assumed they had been completely incinerated by the blaze. Mark's blood ran cold. He looked at the news report, A photo of a young couple, smiling, their lives ahead of them. The man's name was David. The woman's was Sarah. They were on their way home from a holiday, and they were now forever trapped in a moment of pure, agonizing pain, their souls bound to the scene of their final moments. Mark left the Roadhouse without finishing his coffee. He drove home, his mind clear, a new kind of dread settling in his gut. The smell of smoke, for him, wasn't just a part of the job. It was a reminder of what was out there, of the places where the line between the living and the dead gets blurry, where a fire isn't just a fire, but a window into a moment of eternal, silent torment. He never went back to that stretch of road. Some fires, he learned, are not meant to be fought. They are meant to be witnessed. And once you've seen them, they become a part of you. A ghost in your memory, a silent fire that burns forever.
The Cursed Detour.
Megan and Ben were on vacation. They'd been married for 2 years and had planned a cross-country road trip from their home in Boston all the way to Yellowstone National Park. They were the perfect couple, a little too perfect maybe, with their matching jackets and their shared playlist of cheesy 80s rock ballads. They were driving a shiny new SUV, the kind with all the bells and whistles, and their GPS was their gospel. They were nearing the halfway point of their trip, somewhere in the heart of rural Wyoming, a state known for its endless plains and its terrifyingly empty roads. It was a beautiful afternoon. The sun was a low, golden orb in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. They were laughing, singing along to the radio, completely lost in their own little bubble of happiness. They had been on the road for hours, and Ben, the driver, was starting to get tired. He was looking forward to the next town, a place called Blackwood, where they had a motel room booked. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, they saw it, a large, rusty sign on the side of the road, the paint faded and peeling. It read, "Blackwood Detour ahead." The sign pointed to a small, unpaved road that branched off the main highway, disappearing into a thick forest of pines. "Huh," Ben said. The GPS didn't mention this. Megan, ever the pragmatist, just shrugged. "Probably a quick route to avoid roadwork. It'll save us some time." They took the turn. The new road was a far cry from the smooth asphalt they were used to. It was rocky and uneven, a trail of dirt and gravel that made the SUV shudder and protest. The trees on either side of the road were tall and ancient, their branches so intertwined that they created a canopy, a roof of darkness that blocked out the last of the sunlight. The road was a tunnel, and they were driving deeper and deeper into it. "This feels weird," Megan said, her voice a little too quiet. The 80s rock ballads on the radio had been replaced by static. She tried to change the station, but all she got was a low hiss, a sound like a distant, angry whisper. They both looked at the GPS. It was a blank screen. "No signal," Ben said, a knot forming in his stomach. The digital map, which had been their steadfast companion, was gone. They were on their own. They drove for what felt like an eternity. The road was winding and treacherous, and the air had grown cold. A thick fog began to creep in, a pale, eerie mist that clung to the trees and made the world outside the car a ghostly, indistinct blur. Ben checked the time on the dashboard. They had been on the detour for an hour, but it felt like they had barely gone a mile. They were lost, completely and utterly lost. Suddenly, Megan gasped, pointing a trembling finger out the passenger side window. "Ben, look." He looked, and his heart leaped into his throat. In the fog, just on the edge of the woods, stood a person, a woman. She was wearing a long, old-fashioned white dress, and her hair, a wild mass of tangled black, was falling over her face. She was just standing there, unmoving, staring at their car. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and she was holding a bouquet of dead, withered flowers. "What is that?" Ben stammered, his foot pressing down on the accelerator. The woman didn't move. She just watched them pass, her empty eyes a horrifying void in the mist. "She's a hitchhiker," Megan said, her voice strained, as if she were trying to convince herself. "Just a weird hitchhiker." But as they rounded a sharp bend in the road, they saw her again. The same woman, the same white dress, the same dead flowers. She was standing there, just a few hundred yards from where they had last seen her. It was impossible. She couldn't have moved that fast. "It's not real," Ben whispered, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "It's just the fog." But the woman wasn't a trick of the light. They saw her a third time, and a fourth. She was a silent, terrifying sentinel, a ghostly landmark on this cursed road. With each sighting, she seemed to get a little closer to the edge of the road, her expression of silent agony becoming clearer. They were driving down a long, straight stretch when they saw her for the fifth time. This time, she was standing in the middle of the road, her arms outstretched, her face a mask of silent pleading. Her eyes, he could see them now, were a startling, vibrant blue, and they were filled with tears. Ben, terrified, slammed on the brakes. The SUV screeched to a halt, a few feet from the woman. She didn't move. She didn't have to. The car was silent, the engine sputtering and dying. Ben frantically turned the key. Nothing. The car was dead. They were stranded, and the woman was standing there, in the middle of the road, staring at them. Megan, her body shaking, fumbled for her phone. "We need to call for help, Ben." But there was still no signal. The blank screen of the GPS mocked them. They were completely isolated, and the air around the car grew colder, the silence so loud it was deafening. Just then a faint, disembodied voice drifted through the air, carried on the still, foggy wind. It was a woman's voice, soft and mournful, like a ghost sighing. "Don't go this way," it whispered, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ben and Megan looked at each other, their faces pale with pure, unadulterated fear. The woman in the road was gone. The fog was gone. The road was clear, and their car was working again. Ben, not daring to question it, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. He slammed the car into reverse, did a three-point turn, and drove as fast as he could back to the main highway. They drove for what felt like an hour, the landscape of pines and fog-shrouded fields slowly giving way to open prairie. They finally reached the main road, a sign for Blackwood just a few miles down the road. They pulled into the town, their bodies exhausted, their minds spinning with what they had just experienced. They went to a local diner, a place with a chip counter and a jukebox playing country music. They ordered coffee and just sat there, in a kind of stunned, silent shock. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, saw the look on their faces. "Y'all look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a soft laugh. Ben, needing to talk, needing to validate what had happened, told her about the detour, about the strange woman, about the ghost whispers. The waitress's smile faded. Her expression turned serious, and a sad, knowing look came into her eyes. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice a gentle sigh. "You took the old road." She told them the story. Years ago, that road was the only way into Blackwood. It was a treacherous, dangerous road, and it was the scene of a terrible tragedy. A young couple, on their way to their wedding, had gotten into a car crash on that very road. The woman, a beautiful girl named Sarah, had been thrown from the car and killed instantly. Her fiancé, a man named Thomas, had been stranded, alone and terrified, waiting for help that never came. He walked to town, but he had to leave her behind. He never got over it. He died a broken man, always looking for a way to warn people away from that road. And Sarah, she was still there, the waitress said. Her spirit, forever bound to the place of her death, was a guardian, a warning. She appeared to those who were lost, those who were driving on that road, and she silently begged them to turn back. Her spirit was still in love with her fiancé, and she couldn't stand the thought of anyone else suffering the same fate. Ben and Megan left the diner, their coffee untouched. They drove to their motel, their sense of a perfect vacation replaced by a profound, haunting sadness. They had stumbled into a place where grief and love had become a physical, tangible force. They had been warned by a ghost, saved by a soul who couldn't rest. They never took a detour again. They drove the rest of their trip on the main highways, their GPS a constant companion. But whenever they saw a side road, a small, dark path leading into the trees, they would glance at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew that some detours aren't just a way to save time. Some are a way to step out of your world and into someone else's, a place where the past isn't a memory, but a living, breathing, and terrifying presence.
The Hitchhiker's Toll.
The night shift is a different kind of beast. The world is quieter, the roads are emptier, and the loneliness is a heavy, constant companion for a trucker named Frank, a man who'd spent 30 years navigating the desolate highways of the American West. This was his life. His truck, a big rig with over 1 million miles on the odometer, was his office, his bedroom, his whole world. It was just after midnight, and Frank was rolling through a stretch of highway in Nevada, the kind of place where the stars are so bright they seem to hum. He was pushing through the exhaustion, his mind a blur of coffee and road lines. He was on his way to a depot in Reno, a few hundred miles away. The silence of the cab was broken only by the low rumble of the engine and the distant static of the CB radio. He was a few miles past a town called Battle Mountain when he saw him, a figure on the side of the road, just standing there. He was a small man, dressed in a dark suit, his face a pale, ghostly oval in the moonlight. He wasn't holding his thumb out, or waving, or anything. He was just standing there, perfectly still. Frank didn't slow down. He'd seen plenty of odd things on the road. Drunk people, stranded drivers, wild animals. But this guy was different. He had an unsettling stillness about him, a quality that felt unnatural, wrong. Frank glanced in his side mirror as he passed, and for a split second, he saw the man's face. It was completely expressionless, a blank slate, but his eyes were a startling, vibrant green, and they seemed to be staring directly into Frank's soul. A chill ran down Frank's spine. He pushed on, the image of the man in his mind. He told himself it was just a hitchhiker, a weird one maybe, but still just a man. He drove for 10 minutes, maybe 15, and then he saw it again. The same man on the side of the road, standing in the exact same spot, in the exact same pose. It was impossible. Frank had been doing over 70 miles an hour. There was no way the man could have gotten ahead of him. He felt a shot of adrenaline, a cold, hard knot in his gut. He drove on, his eyes darting from the road to the side mirror. He saw him a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth. With each sighting, the man seemed to be a little closer to the center of the road, his stillness becoming more and more menacing. It was a silent game, a terrifying cat and mouse, where the mouse was a 40-ton truck and the cat was a phantom in a suit. Frank's mind was racing. He was rationalizing, trying to find an explanation. Maybe there were multiple men? No, that was ridiculous. Maybe it was a reflection, a trick of the mind? He wasn't that tired. He was spooked. He was terrified. He put his foot down on the accelerator, pushing the truck to its limit, a desperate attempt to outrun the impossible. He was going as fast as he could when he saw him again. This time, he was standing in the middle of the road, a dark, looming figure against the pale white line. Frank's heart hammered against his ribs. He slammed on the brakes, the air brakes hissing in protest, the tires screeching on the asphalt. The truck shuddered to a halt, a mere 10 feet from the man. The man didn't move. He just stood there, his face still a blank mask, his green eyes still burning with that unnatural light. Frank sat in the cab, his body trembling, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The man was just watching him. The silence was so profound it was a physical weight. Then the man did something. He raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed, not at Frank or at the truck. He was pointing at a small, almost invisible marker on the side of the road, a tiny stone, half buried in the dirt, with a faint, illegible inscription. And as he pointed, a voice, a hollow, mournful echo, filled the cab. It wasn't loud. It was a whisper, a sigh, but it was so clear, so close. It felt like it was coming from inside Frank's head. He needs a ride. He's waiting for you. Frank's blood ran cold. The man was still pointing at the marker, and a low, guttural groan, a sound of agony and rage, filled the air. Frank looked at the marker, then at the man, and back at the marker. He got it. He knew what the man was. He wasn't a hitchhiker. He was a guide, a messenger. He was a guardian of the dead. He looked at the side of the road, and, in the pale moonlight, he saw it. A dark, slumped shape, half hidden by a bush. It was a person. A dead person. A teenager dressed in a hoodie and jeans. His body twisted and broken. A gash across his forehead. His eyes were open and staring blankly at the sky. He had been hit by a car, left to die. He was the one who was waiting. Frank's stomach turned. The man in the suit, the ghost, was still there, pointing at the body. He hadn't appeared to Frank because he wanted a ride. He had appeared to him because he wanted Frank to see. He was there to make sure that this poor kid's soul wasn't just left to wander the highway forever, a forgotten casualty. He was a spectral toll collector, and the price of passage was simple: acknowledgement, recognition, a promise to do something. Frank, his body still shaking, grabbed his phone and called 911. His voice was a raw, frantic stammer. He told them about the accident, about the body. He stayed on the line, his eyes fixed on the man in the suit, who was now standing over the body, his hand on the teenager's shoulder, as if he were comforting him. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, a sound that brought an immense, soul-crushing relief to Frank. The man in the suit looked up. He turned his head and looked directly at Frank, and for the first time, his face showed a hint of emotion, not anger or malice. It was gratitude, a small, sad, and profound expression of thanks. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he and the body of the boy vanished. Just like that. Gone. The police and an ambulance arrived. They found the body, just as Frank had described. They asked him questions, and he told them he had seen the body on the side of the road. He left out the part about the man in the suit. He knew they wouldn't believe him. They would think he was just another tired trucker seeing things. But Frank knew the truth. He had paid the hitchhiker's toll. The price was to witness something terrible, to acknowledge a forgotten tragedy, and to do the right thing. He finished his route, but he was a changed man. He no longer saw the highways as just roads. He saw them as a place where the living and the dead intersect, where some souls are just waiting for a compassionate witness to release them from their eternal vigil. He never saw the man in the suit again. But sometimes, when he's driving through a lonely stretch of highway late at night, he'll look in his side mirror, and for a fleeting second, he'll see something in the darkness. Not a man, not a ghost, but a small, glowing green light. A silent thank you from a soul who was finally able to rest.
The Crying Bridge.
Some places just have a story to them. Not a story you read in a book, but a story that's etched into the very ground. A memory so powerful it refuses to fade. For a state trooper named Sarah, that place was a bridge over the Snake River in rural Oregon. It was an old, rusted iron bridge, a relic from a different time, and it was famous for a reason that had nothing to do with its architecture. Sarah had been on the force for 10 years. She had seen it all. Car accidents, drunk drivers, the occasional domestic dispute. She was a professional, a woman who didn't get rattled easily. But the bridge was different. It had a reputation, a dark history that every local knew. It was called the Crying Bridge for a reason. The legend said that on certain nights, usually around midnight, you could hear it. A sound that wasn't a car, or the wind, or a passing animal. It was the sound of a woman crying. A soft, mournful wail that seemed to come from under the bridge, from the dark, churning water below. The local kids would dare each other to go there at night, to stand on the bridge and listen. Very few of them ever did it more than once. Sarah was on patrol one night, just after a major storm had rolled through. The rain had finally stopped, but the air was thick with mist, and the river was a churning, angry mess of brown water and whitecaps. She was nearing the bridge, her headlights cutting a swathe through the fog, when her dispatcher's voice crackled on the radio. Unit 7, we've got a possible 10 to 50 vehicle over the bridge. Be advised, it's the old one over the Snake. Sarah's stomach dropped. 10 to 4, she said, her voice tight. A 10 to 50-minute accident, and vehicle over the bridge meant it was a bad one. She put the pedal to the metal, the siren wailing into the empty night. As she approached the bridge, she saw it. A single car, a Black Sedan, was nose down in the river, half submerged in the swirling current. The front of the car was crushed, and the back half was all that was visible, a twisted monument to a terrible mistake. She pulled her patrol car to a stop on the bridge. the wheels of the car grinding against the metal grating with a sickening groan. The sound of the river was a roar, a constant, angry hiss. But under it, she heard something else, a faint, low sound. It was the sound of a woman crying. Sarah's professional training kicked in. She grabbed her flashlight and her radio and ran to the edge of the bridge. She shined the light down at the wreckage. She could see no signs of life, no movement. But the crying, it was getting louder. It was coming from the water, from the car. She radioed for backup, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I'm on scene. Vehicle over the side. No signs of life, but I can hear something." The dispatcher, a man named Mike, was an old friend. He knew about the bridge. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and serious. "Just stay put. Don't go down there." But Sarah couldn't. The sound of the crying was so real, so full of a deep and terrible grief, that it was calling to her. It was a sound that broke through all the logic and training. It was a plea. She had to see. She had to help. She ran back to her car and grabbed a rope and her tactical gear. She found a sturdy support beam on the side of the bridge and secured the rope. She started to rappel down, the beam of her flashlight cutting a path through the mist. The crying was so close now. It was the sound of a young woman, a sound of profound loss and sadness. She got to the bottom of the bridge, her boots sinking into the wet, sandy riverbank. She was just a few feet from the wrecked car. The crying was coming from inside. She pushed her way through the thick brush, her heart hammering in her chest. She shone her light into the shattered back window of the car, and what she saw made her gasp. A young woman, her hair a long, dark cascade over her face, was sitting in the back seat. She was soaked and shivering, her body huddled in on itself. But she wasn't crying. Her face was a blank mask, her eyes wide and vacant, staring straight ahead. The crying, Sarah realized with a sickening jolt, wasn't coming from the woman. It was coming from the car itself, from the seats, from the engine, from the twisted metal. It was a sound of a car's death rattle, but it sounded like a cry of grief. Sarah took a step back, her mind reeling. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a supernatural event. The car was wailing. The ghost was the car, the ghost of a terrible crash, forever replaying its final moments. Suddenly, the young woman in the back seat turned her head, her eyes, those wide, vacant eyes, fixed on Sarah, and she smiled, a slow, chilling smile that was all teeth and a profound emptiness. She raised a pale, dripping hand and pointed, not at Sarah, but at the river. Sarah turned her flashlight beam to the water, her blood running cold. In the churning current, just a few feet from the wreckage, was a small, pale face. A child, a little girl, her eyes closed, her body floating listlessly in the dark water. Her little hands were reaching for the car, for the woman inside. The crying from the car intensified. It wasn't grief. It was sorrow. It was the sound of a mother who had lost her child. A woman who was so consumed with her grief that she had become one with the vehicle that had killed her. The crying wasn't a warning. It was a lament. Sarah, a mother herself, felt a wave of nausea. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't just here to report a 10 to 50. She was here to witness a tragedy, to give a voice to the pain that was trapped in this place. She radioed her position again, her voice a low whisper. "I have a confirmation of two, a woman and a child, both deceased." The backup finally arrived. A few minutes later, the first lights of the fire truck appeared on the bridge above, and the sound of the crying from the car, it stopped. Just like that. The silence was deafening. The mist cleared, and the night air was still. The woman in the car was no longer visible. Just a lump of wet, twisted metal. The fire crew and rescue divers retrieved the body of the child first. They found the woman's body inside the car, just as Sarah had seen her. The fire captain, a grizzled man who had seen it all, looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. Sarah just shook her head. He knew what she meant. He knew about the crying. They never talked about it. Sarah still patrols that stretch of road. She still drives over that bridge. And sometimes, late at night, she'll hear a sound. It's not a cry anymore. It's a low, almost imperceptible sound of a mother and her child, forever reunited. the silence of their passing a profound, gentle whisper in the wind. The crying bridge had stopped crying. The souls who were trapped there had found their peace, thanks to a trooper who was brave enough to listen.
The Vanishing Tourist.
Every year, millions of people visit the United States, drawn by the promise of the open road and the endless vistas. They rent a car, pull up a map, and set off on a great adventure. But some of them, a very small number, get a different kind of adventure, one they never asked for, one they never get to finish. This is the story of a couple named Marcus and Lily, two young Australians on a grand tour of America. They were in the Pacific Northwest, driving a rented camper van through the stunning, misty landscapes of Washington State. They were full of life, full of hope, and completely unaware of the line they were about to cross. It was late afternoon, a thick, cold fog rolling in from the coast, a silent, white blanket that swallowed the trees and the mountains. They were on a quiet, two-lane road, the kind that seems to go on forever, with no towns or gas stations for miles. They were looking for a place to pull over for the night, a scenic spot where they could make dinner and enjoy the solitude. That's when they saw her, on the side of the road, standing in mist, a girl with a big backpack and a brightly colored windbreaker. She looked young, maybe early 20s, and she was soaked to the bone. She was holding a sign. The sign was blank. No destination, just a simple, blank piece of cardboard. Marcus, a man who saw the good in everyone, felt a pang of sympathy. "We have to help her," he said to Lily. Lily, more cautious, hesitated. "Marcus, she's not even asking for a ride. She's just standing there." But Marcus was already slowing down. He pulled the camper van over and rolled down the window. "Hey," he said, "you need a lift?" The girl looked up. Her eyes were strange, pale gray, almost translucent. Her face was pale, and her lips were a thin, tight line. She didn't say anything. She just got in, her wet clothes dripping onto the passenger seat. She pulled her backpack off and hugged it to her chest. The air in the van grew cold, an unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "Where are you heading?" Marcus asked, tried to sound friendly. The girl just looked at him, her gray eyes a chilling, empty void. "I'm heading to the end," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, a dry, brittle sound like dead leaves scraping on the ground. Marcus and Lily exchanged a nervous glance. This was a mistake. They should have just kept driving. Marcus put the van in gear and pulled back onto the road. The girl said nothing, just sat there, staring out the window at the swirling mist. It was an hour of silence, the atmosphere in the van so thick with tension it was suffocating. Lily finally decided to break the silence. "So, where are you from?" she asked. The girl turned her head, her gray eyes fixing on Lily. "I'm from nowhere," she said. Her voice was still that dry whisper, but there was something else in it now. A sense of profound, ageless sadness. "I've been here for a long time. Waiting." "Waiting for what?" Marcus wanted to ask, but the words wouldn't come out. He was just looking at the road ahead, his hands tight on the steering wheel. He saw something in the mist. A shape, a fleeting form, a flicker of movement. He told himself it was just a trick of the fog, just a branch swaying in the wind. But he knew it wasn't. Suddenly, the girl spoke again. "There it is," she whispered, a thin, spectral smile on her lips. She pointed to a small, almost invisible side road that branched off the main highway. It was just a small dirt path, barely wide enough for the van. "Turn here. This is it." Marcus didn't want to. Everything in him screamed no, but he felt a strange, irresistible compulsion, a force that was beyond his control. He turned the wheel, and the van lurched onto the dirt road. The girl just sat there, her smile growing wider, her gray eyes burning with an eerie light. The road was even narrower than it had looked. The trees on either side were gnarled and ancient, their twisted branches scraping against the sides of the van. The fog was thicker here, so thick he could barely see 10 feet in front of him. He felt a sense of disorientation, a feeling that he was no longer on a road, but in a tunnel of trees and mist that had no beginning and no end. Suddenly, the girl said stop. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, ringing command, a sound that seemed to echo in the van. Marcus slammed on the brakes. The van came to a sudden, lurching halt. The girl got out, her movements slow and deliberate, and she walked to the back of the van. Marcus and Lily just sat there, frozen, their hearts pounding in their chests. They watched in the rearview mirror as the girl walked to the back of the van, opened the back doors, and stepped inside. "What is she doing?" Lily whispered, her voice a terrified gasp. The back doors closed with a soft thud. There was a long, terrifying silence, and then a low, scraping sound, as if something was being dragged. The van felt lighter somehow, emptier. Marcus got out, his legs trembling, and walked to the back of the van. He pulled the doors open, and what he saw made him scream. The back of the van was empty. There was no girl, no backpack, no sign that anyone had ever been in there. But on the floor, etched into the dusty wood, were 3 words, scrawled in a frantic, spidery hand. "Don't go back." He stumbled back to the driver's seat, his mind reeling. He looked at Lily, her face pale with terror. "She's gone," he said, his voice a broken whisper. "She's just gone." They sat in the silent, empty van, their minds trying to make sense of what had just happened. They turned the van around and drove back to the main highway. The fog had lifted, and the sun was setting, a faint, orange glow on the horizon. They drove for hours, their minds blank, their eyes fixed on the road. They finally pulled into a gas station, a small, desolate place with a single attendant. They told him what had happened, their voices a jumbled, frantic stammer. The attendant, a wizened old man with a long gray beard, just listened, a knowing look in his eyes. "You met her, did you?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "The Vanishing Tourist." He told them the story. Years ago, a young woman had been hiking in those woods. She was a tourist, a beautiful girl with gray eyes and a love for the outdoors. She got lost in a sudden, thick fog and wandered onto the road. A driver, spooked by her sudden appearance, swerved to avoid her and crashed, a fatal accident. But the driver wasn't alone. His passenger, a young man, survived the crash but was left stranded. The girl, the ghost, felt responsible. She was the reason he was alone, lost, and terrified. She had been taking people down that road ever since, bringing them to the place where the driver had died, a place where she had to live, a place where she was trapped. She wasn't trying to scare them. She was trying to get a message to someone, to a loved one she had lost. The message was a warning, a desperate plea to an unknown recipient. Marcus and Lily left the gas station, their minds spinning with the new information. They had met a ghost, a lost soul who was trying to finish a journey she had started a long time ago. They never saw her again, but they did find something else. The next day, after a long drive, they found a small, desolate campsite on the side of the road. On the ground, next to a small, rusting camper van, was a backpack. It was old and worn, but it was the same backpack the girl had been carrying. And next to it, on a faded piece of paper, was a scrawled message, a frantic, spidery hand. It read, "Lily, I'm going to find you. I'll always be with you. Don't go back." The signature was a name, Marcus. The same name as Marcus, the same name as the man in the van. The ghost they had met wasn't a girl. It was a man, a ghost of a man who was forever stuck in the last moments of his life. A silent, spectral tourist, forever searching for a woman named Lily. And the person they had picked up was her, a lost soul, forever waiting for the man who would never arrive.
The Ghost of Route 66.
If you've ever driven the old Route 66, you know it's not a highway anymore. It's a memory. It's a series of 2-lane blacktops that weave through the forgotten heart of America, past crumbling diners, rusted gas stations, and motel signs that haven't been lit since the 70s. It's a road for those who are looking for something more than just a destination. It's a road that's looking for them. For a trucker named Jack, it was home. He'd been driving the mother road for 30 years, and he considered himself a historian of its strange and beautiful decay. He'd heard all the legends, the phantom cars, the ghostly hitchhikers, the lights that flicker in abandoned towns. He'd always dismissed them as tall tales, a bit of color added to the vast, empty landscapes. Jack was a man of facts, of logic, of a million miles of undeniable truth. It was a night in late summer, somewhere between Winslow and Flagstaff, Arizona. The desert air was cool and crisp, but the heat of the day was still rising off the asphalt in shimmering waves. The moon was full, a giant silver coin in the sky, casting stark shadows across the scrub brush and the endless plains. Jack was 100 miles from anywhere, his rig a rolling island in a sea of nothing. The only light was from his headlights, and the only sound was the low, steady rumble of his engine. He was sipping a coffee that tasted like burnt asphalt, his mind a quiet hum of exhaustion and familiarity. Just past a deserted diner with a neon sign that read open, but clearly hadn't been in decades, he saw her, a small, dark figure in the distance, right in the middle of his lane. He slowed down, his brow furrowed in confusion. As he got closer, his headlights illuminated the scene. It was a woman. She was dressed in a long, flowing white dress, the kind you'd see in a black and white photo from the 50s. Her hair was a light brown, tied back with a ribbon, and she was standing perfectly still, facing him. She wasn't holding a sign, or waving her arms, or trying to flag him down. She was just standing there. Jack's first thought was that she was a prank, a mannequin set up by some kids. But as he got closer, he could see her face. It was pale, almost translucent, and it was a mask of profound, devastating sorrow. Her eyes, wide and empty, were locked on his truck, and a single, silent tear was running down her cheek, catching the light like a small, sad diamond. He laid on the horn, a long, blaring cry that shattered the silence of the desert. The sound echoed off the buttes and mesas, a frantic warning. The woman didn't flinch. He swerved hard, his rig lurching to the right, the tires groaning as they kissed the edge of the asphalt. He flew past her, the wind from the truck a roaring gust. He looked in his rearview mirror, his heart hammering against his ribs, and she was gone, just gone. The road was empty, the moonlight painting a perfect, empty line to the horizon. Jack told himself it was fatigue, the long miles, the bad coffee, the strange beauty of the desert. He shook his head, took a deep breath, and drove on. But the image of her face, of that single tear, was burned into his memory. An hour later, as he was coming up to a long, empty straightaway, he saw her again. This time, she was closer. She wasn't in the middle of the road. She was standing on the side, right in the path of his headlights, her back to him, her head bowed. He slowed down, his foot easing off the accelerator, a sick feeling of dread pooling in his gut. He was close enough now to see the details of her dress, a floral pattern that was faded and worn. As he pulled alongside her, he caught a glimpse of her face in his side mirror. Her eyes were still wide and empty, but her mouth was open in a silent, heartbreaking scream. He slammed on the gas, the engine roaring in protest as the big truck shot forward. He didn't look back. He just drove, the needle on the speedometer climbing higher and higher. He was no longer on a schedule. He was running from a ghost that wasn't even a ghost. He was running from a profound, ageless sorrow. He drove for a long, frantic hour, the night a blur of fear and adrenaline. He was coming to a narrow, twisting canyon road, the kind that forces you to slow down, to pay attention. He was rounding a sharp bend when he saw her. This time, she wasn't standing on the side of the road. She was on the hood of his truck, sitting there, her legs dangling over the front bumper, her face inches from his windshield. Her hands were on the glass, her fingers leaving long, ghostly streaks in the dust. Her eyes, those pale, empty eyes, were staring directly into his. Her lips were moving, a silent, desperate plea, a frantic, unhearable warning. Jack screamed, a raw, terrified sound that tore from his throat. He slammed on the brakes, the air brakes hissing in protest, the tires screeching on the asphalt. The truck shuddered to a stop, the force of the sudden stop sending his coffee cup flying. He was frozen, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the woman on his hood. She just sat there. The silent scream on her face was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated desperation. She lifted her hand and pointed, not at the road ahead, or at him, but to the right, to a small, almost invisible path that led off the road, into the rocks and the desert scrub, a place no car could go. He finally snapped out of it. He threw open the door, grabbed his flashlight, and scrambled out of the cab, his body trembling so violently he could barely stand. He shined the beam on the hood of his truck. Nothing. The hood was empty, the dust undisturbed. But the feeling of her presence, of her profound sorrow, was still there, a thick, suffocating weight. He looked at the path she had pointed to, the path that was barely a path at all. His fear was still there, a bitter taste in his mouth, but it was mixed with an intense, unshakable curiosity. He felt a pull, a desperate need to know what she was trying to tell him. He walked to the path, his boots crunching on the loose gravel, and he followed it for a few yards, his flashlight beam cutting a path through the darkness. And then he saw it. Tucked away in a small ravine, half buried by rocks and tumbleweeds, was the rusted wreckage of an old car. A 1950s Ford, its body a mangled, unrecognizable mess of steel and chrome. He shone his light on it, his heart hammering against his ribs, and saw it. On the side of a large rock, a small, faded plaque. He knelt down, his hand trembling as he wiped the dirt and dust away. The plaque was a memorial, and it was a black and white photo of a young couple, dressed in 50s clothes. They were sitting in a car, the same car, and they were smiling. They were in love, their faces alight with a kind of pure, unadulterated joy that seemed to belong to another time, a happier time. The caption read, "In loving memory of John and Mary, May 26, 1957, lost on their way to a new life." Jack's blood ran cold. The woman in the photo was the woman he had been seeing. The man in the photo, the man with a big, goofy smile, was... He looked back at his truck, and in the side mirror, he saw it. A fleeting, almost imperceptible reflection. Not of him, but of a man. A man in a suit. A man with a wide, heartbreakingly happy smile. And he was sitting in the passenger seat of Jack's truck, looking at the road ahead. The dread he had felt before was nothing compared to the truth that now washed over him. The woman wasn't the ghost trying to scare him. She was the ghost of his profound sorrow, a visual manifestation of a pain so deep it was a physical force. She was a ghost of a warning. The man in the passenger seat, the man in the photo, he was the one who was truly trapped. He was forever bound to this spot, to the memory of the crash, to the loss of his love. He was the one who was trying to stop Jack, to prevent him from meeting the same fate. He was using the image of his love, the woman who had died, to stop people, to warn them, to keep them from a terrible end. The ghost of Route 66 wasn't a frightening figure in the middle of the road. It was a heartbroken man, a silent, unseen presence, using the memory of his wife to save others. Jack stood there for a long time, the weight of the realization a heavy, suffocating blanket. He went back to his truck, and in the cab, the air was cold. But now, it wasn't a cold of fear. It was a cold of profound, sympathetic sadness. He took a photo of the memorial on his phone, and he drove away, a changed man. He no longer saw the road as a simple path from one place to another. He saw it as a living, breathing thing, a repository of stories, of pain, of warnings. He never saw the ghosts again, but every time he drove that stretch of Route 66, he would slow down, and he would glance at the old, forgotten memorial, and for a fleeting second, he would see a tiny, almost imperceptible flash of light in his rearview mirror. It wasn't a headlight or a reflection. It was the smile of a ghost, a smile of gratitude, a silent thank you from a man who was forever bound to a sad, beautiful road.
The Black Sedan.
There's a kind of quiet confidence that comes with being a new long-haul trucker. You've just gotten your license, you're in a brand new rig, and the whole country is your open road. You feel like you're on top of the world, invincible, a king of the asphalt. This was a young trucker named Chris. He wasn't a grizzled vet with 1,000,000 miles under his belt. He was a kid, maybe 22, full of piss and vinegar and a healthy dose of youthful overconfidence. He was driving a brand new Freightliner, a shining monument to his new career, and he was on his way from El Paso to Dallas. The highway was I-10, a long, lonely stretch of blacktop that cuts through the heart of West Texas. It was just after midnight. The kind of night where the air is still and the vast, empty sky is so full of stars, it looks like a tapestry of light. Chris had been driving for 8 hours, pushing it a little, trying to make good time. He was sipping a soda, singing along to the country music on the radio, feeling a little tired, but mostly just happy. Then he saw it. In his rearview mirror, a set of headlights. They were close. Too close. They were so bright, they seemed to burn a hole through the darkness. A set of twin suns in the mirror. It was a car, a black sedan, and it was right on his tail, tailgating him relentlessly. Chris frowned. He sped up a little, to give himself some distance. The sedan sped up with him, staying right there, a silent, menacing shadow. He slowed down. The sedan slowed down. It was a game of chicken, and Chris was getting a little nervous. He tried to ignore it, to just focus on the road ahead, but the headlights were a constant, blinding presence, a pure white glare that filled his mirrors. He tried to pass. He tried to get into the other lane, but every time he moved, the sedan moved with him, a phantom of the road, a dance of pure frustration and fear. He started to get a knot in his stomach. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just an aggressive driver. He glanced at his speedometer. He was going 80 miles an hour, pushing the Freightliner to its limit. The sedan was right there, a ghost of a car, a silent predator. He finally snapped. He was going to pull over. He was going to let this psycho pass him. He put his blinker on and started to ease the truck onto the shoulder. As he did, the sedan, which had been right on his tail, just vanished. 1 second it was there, a terrifying presence, and the next it was gone. Just a long, empty stretch of highway behind him, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. Chris sat there for a long time, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He told himself it was a hallucination. It had to be. He was tired. He was stressed. He was just seeing things. He put the truck in gear and drove on, but the feeling of being hunted, of being watched, was still there, a constant, chilling presence. An hour later, it happened again. The headlights, a flash of pure white light, appeared in his rearview mirror. The black sedan was back, but this time, it wasn't just tailgating him. It was weaving, erratically, dangerously. It was coming up beside him, then dropping back, then coming up again. It was trying to get him to swerve. It was trying to make him crash. Chris's mind was racing. He was no longer just nervous. He was terrified. He was no longer in control. This was a game of life and death, and he was losing. He started to notice the details. The car had no license plate. The windows were completely blacked out, not just tinted, but a deep, impenetrable black. He couldn't see the driver. He couldn't see anything. It was just a black sedan, a vessel of pure, unadulterated menace. The air in his cab grew cold, an unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. He could feel a cold presence, a sense of absolute malevolence, in the cab with him. It was a silent passenger, a ghost with a terrible purpose. He tried to radio for help, to call 911, but his radio was just static. His phone had no signal. He was completely and utterly alone, a single truck on a vast, empty highway, being stalked by a ghost. The sedan finally pulled ahead of him, and Chris felt a surge of relief. It was over. He was safe. But then, as he got to the top of a small rise, he saw it. The sedan was stopped in the middle of the road. Dead stop. Its brake lights, a twin set of fiery red orbs, were burning in the darkness, a silent, horrifying warning. Chris's mind went blank. He just saw the red lights, a wall of pure danger, and he instinctively slammed on the brakes. The big rig screamed, the tires leaving long, black streaks on the asphalt, the smell of burning rubber filling the cab. The truck fishtailed, its front end swinging wildly, and for a terrifying second, he thought he was going to flip. He was going to die. He was going to become another statistic, another ghost on a lonely road. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the impact, the sound of tearing metal, the final, agonizing pain. But the impact never came. The truck skidded to a stop, the engine groaning, the cab a violent, swaying mess. He sat there, his body trembling, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He opened his eyes, his mind a panicked haze. The sedan was gone. It wasn't in front of him. It wasn't behind him. It was gone. Just a long, empty stretch of road, stretching out into the darkness. He sat there for a long time, his body shaking, his mind reeling. He was alive. He had survived. He finally got out of the cab, his legs wobbly, and walked to the spot where the sedan had been. There was nothing. No skid marks, no broken glass, nothing. But off the road, in the pale moonlight, he saw it. A small, rusted cross, half buried in the dirt, a memorial. He walked to it, his flashlight beam cutting a path through the darkness, and he knelt down. The cross had a small plaque on it. The inscription was faint, but he could make it out. It was a date from 20 years ago, and a name, a family that had died in a car crash on that exact spot. The crash had been caused by a semi-truck. A young, exhausted driver had fallen asleep at the wheel and hit them. The family had been in a black sedan. Chris's blood ran cold. The car wasn't a warning. It wasn't a ghost of a past tragedy. It was the ghost of a terrible, vengeful hunger. The black sedan wasn't a victim. It was a predator. It was a malevolent, sentient entity, forever trapped in the last moments of its existence, forever trying to make someone else suffer its same fate. It wasn't trying to scare him. It was trying to kill him. It was trying to get him to swerve, to crash, to become another ghost on this long, lonely stretch of highway. Chris got back in his truck, a new kind of fear setting in. He drove away, his mind numb, the world outside the windshield a blur of fear and exhaustion. He never drove that road again at night. He changed his route. He told his story to other truckers, but he never told it with a sense of adventure or a sense of excitement. He told it with a quiet, hollow sadness. He told it as a warning. The real horror, he learned, wasn't the ghosts that appeared to you. It was the realization that the road isn't just a place of passage, but a hunting ground for things that are forever angry, forever trapped, and forever hungry for a new victim.
The Lighthouse on the Mountain.
Have you ever been so lost that the very concept of direction loses its meaning? When the world outside your windshield is nothing but a swirling, white void, and the road ahead is just a faint, wet ribbon of asphalt disappearing into nothing. That's where our last story begins, with a woman named Clara, a solo traveler seeking inspiration and solitude in the desolate beauty of the Scottish Highlands. Clara wasn't a truck driver. She was an artist, a woman who found her muse in the quiet loneliness of the wilderness. She was driving a small, rented car, the kind that feels like a toy against the ancient, craggy mountains that loomed on either side of the road. It was late afternoon, and a thick, soupy fog, the kind that can swallow a whole car, had rolled in off the locks and settled over the landscape like a ghostly blanket. She was on a single-lane road, a narrow, winding path with no streetlights and no signs. The world outside her car was a silent, shifting canvas of gray and white. She had been lost for hours, her GPS a useless, blank screen. She felt a knot of panic forming in her stomach, a feeling of being completely and utterly alone in a vast, indifferent world. Then she saw it. In the distance, high up on the peak of a jagged, black mountain, a single, piercing beam of light cut through the fog. It was a lighthouse, but that was impossible. Lighthouses are on the coast, on the sea. This one was on a mountain, but it was there, a steady, rhythmic beacon, a powerful, hypnotic presence in the darkness. A wave of immense, soul-crushing relief washed over her. It was a light, a sign of life, a beacon of hope. It was a lighthouse, an impossible, beautiful thing, and it was calling to her. She felt an overwhelming compulsion to follow it, to find her way to that point of light in the endless sea of gray. She turned her car onto a smaller, even more treacherous road, one that led up into the mountains. The road was barely a road at all, just a path of loose stones and mud, but she didn't care. Her eyes were fixed on the light, her heart full of a desperate, frantic hope. As she drove, she saw them. First one, then another, then a small group. Figures in the fog, walking on the side of the road, all of them heading in the same direction, all of them walking toward the light. They were indistinct, ghostly shapes, their movements slow and deliberate, their faces hidden by the mist. They looked like lost hikers, or just people who had given up on finding their way. Clara felt a brief pang of sympathy for them, but she pushed it aside. She had to focus. She had to get to that lighthouse. She honked her horn, a series of frantic, desperate blasts. But the figures didn't react. They just kept walking, their silent procession a terrifying, mesmerizing sight. The road grew steeper, the turns sharper, the fog thicker. She was losing all sense of time and distance. It felt like she had been driving for days. The sound of her engine was a low, constant drone, and the only other sound was the slow, rhythmic sweep of the lighthouse beam, a silent, powerful pulse in the darkness. Finally, she saw it, a dark, solid shape at the top of the mountain. The light was no longer a distant beacon, but a blinding, overwhelming presence. She had reached the end of the road. The lighthouse was there, a perfect, physical structure of brick and iron. She got out of her car, her body stiff with exhaustion, her mind a dizzying blur of relief and disorientation. She walked to the heavy, metal door, her boots crunching on the loose gravel. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was warm, and it smelled of old wood and salt. A kind, old man with a long, gray beard was sitting at a table, a small lamp illuminating his face. He smiled at her, a gentle, sad smile. "Welcome," he said, his voice a soft, low rumble. "We've been waiting for you." Clara's heart fluttered. "Thank God," she said, her voice a broken whisper. "I was so lost. I don't understand. A lighthouse. Up here." The man's smile grew a little sadder. "This isn't a lighthouse, not in the way you think," he said, his voice a soft, gentle sigh. "This is a place for the lost." He motioned to the walls. She looked, and her blood ran cold. The walls were covered in old, faded photographs. Photos of people, hikers, drivers, a family in a small car. All of them looked exhausted, lost, and a little afraid. They all had the same, empty look in their eyes. She looked at the photos, her mind reeling, and then she saw it. A small photo in the corner. A photo of her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, her hair matted with rain. It was a photo of her, taken just a few hours ago, from the perspective of someone who had seen her. "I don't understand," she stammered, her voice trembling. "What is this place?" "This," the man said, his voice a gentle, sad whisper, "is the final destination. The light, it doesn't guide you to safety. It guides you to the end of your journey." He told her the truth, the horrible, beautiful, impossible truth. He was a lighthouse keeper, but not for the living. He was the keeper for the dead. He had died on this road himself, in a terrible storm, over 100 years ago. The lighthouse was a haven for lost souls, a place where they could rest before they crossed over. Everyone who came here had died on the road below. The ghosts she had seen were the souls of the people who were about to die. They were all walking to their final destination, a final beacon of light. Clara felt a profound, chilling horror. "But I'm not dead," she said, her voice a frantic, desperate plea. "I'm alive. My car is outside." The man just shook his head, a look of immense pity in his eyes. "Go look," he said. "Go look at the road you came from." Her legs shaking, her mind a dizzying blur of confusion and terror, she walked back outside. The fog had thinned. She could see the road she had come from, the narrow, winding path that had led her to this impossible place. She followed it with her eyes, all the way down the mountain, and her heart shattered. At the bottom of a steep ravine, just off the edge of the road, was a small, mangled wreck of a car. A rented car, a little toy against the vast, indifferent landscape. The car was hers. She had driven off the road, in the fog, a few miles back. She had died in the crash. The light, the beautiful, impossible light, wasn't a warning. It was a distraction. It was a siren call, a beacon to guide her soul to its final rest. Clara just stood there, her mind reeling, her soul aching with a deep, profound sadness. She had been so focused on the light, on the promise of salvation, that she had driven right to her own death. She was a ghost, another lost soul on the mountain. The man came out, and he pointed to a different window, a different beam of light. This light was a soft, gentle white, a peaceful, guiding light to the afterlife. It was a final farewell, a last act of kindness from a man who had been a ghost for 100 years. Clara looked at the light, and for the first time in a long time, she felt peace. She looked at the road below, at the broken car, at her own body, and she felt a sense of finality. She took a deep breath, and she walked into the light. The lighthouse on the mountain was a final destination, a sad, beautiful haven for the lost. And now, for the first time, Clara was no longer lost.
Did you enjoy today's stories? Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. If you've made it this far, leave horripilent in the comments so I know you watched the video all the way through. See you in the next video.